Please welcome Aaron Wright, Cardozo Law School, Taylor Gerring, Ethereum, Patrick Murck, Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, Peter van Valkenburgh, Coin Center, and Diego Zaldivar, Rootstock.
Hey everyone, my name's Aaron Wright. I'm from Cardozo Law School. We've got a great panel. I'm really excited to talk about smart contracts, which I think many people think is the future of where blockchain technology may be going. We've got a great panel. So just to start, I thought everybody could just briefly introduce themselves, give a little background about who they are and where they come from.
So my name is Taylor Gerring. I work with the Ethereum project. I've been doing so for about a little over 2 years now. And before that, I was involved in the Bitcoin space, working on a Hive wallet, multi-token web-based wallet. I'm really excited about decentralization in general and want to do anything I can to help support this whole industry and ecosystem and grow further.
Thanks, Aaron. Patrick Murck. I am at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. My project there is called the Digital Finance Initiative, and we look at how the social implications of a transition from an analog to digital to networked financial and property system.
I'm Peter van Valkenburgh. I'm the Director of Research at Coin Center. Coin Center is a nonprofit advocacy and research center based in Washington, D.C. We are focused on the public policy issues that face decentralized cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or Ethereum.
I'm Diego Gutierrez Zaldivar, CEO of Rootstock. I've been one of the pioneers of the web back in the 90s in Latin America. And since 2012, I'm devoting my full life to Bitcoin and to create grassroots movements in the region with the key objective of bringing financial inclusion through blockchain technologies.
So I should mention just before we dig in, we're gonna reserve some time for questions. We're not going to use the app, but if you have questions, just raise your hand at the end, and then we'll be happy to answer them. But I think just to kind of set the stage, we have researchers at Cornell calling smart contracts the piece of technology that's most likely to seep into everyday lives. We have the U.S. government funding millions of dollars to research smart contracts. But I think just to really understand it, what is a smart contract? Why should we care about these things?
It's a great question. I think it's something that we as an industry are struggling to define, just like we spend a lot of time defining what exactly is blockchain. I think we've done a really good job at that over the last few years. Now I think is an opportunity to define what exactly is smart contract. I think the words on their face don't appropriately describe exactly what we're looking at here. So it's going to take some time with a microscope to figure out what are the important properties that represent smart contract and what part of those can do something to enable business to be more efficient or a better society or further use cases like that.
Yeah, I would tack on. I would agree. The two things to know about a smart contract are that they're dumb and they're not contracts, right? The script is very Boolean and deterministic, right? It's a scripting language. What's interesting about it is when you take these concepts, this scripting language, it's sort of like algorithmic trading, right? Except that you're now using these interoperable platforms for property, for other financial instruments, and you're stringing them together, you're networking them together, and then you create a scripting language which allows you to do really interesting things and transact them programmatically. Now, what that means for society, we don't know how to properly define it exactly right now. I think you're right. We're still at the beginning stage of understanding that. But I do think it'll be a huge lever for lawyers and the legal system to improve itself and become more efficient and democratize the law just a little bit more.
So we still haven't really hazarded a definition. So I'll throw out one that has inspired me for some time that seems reasonable, that gives me something to at least wrap my head around. I really do like Richard Gendall Brown, who's now at R3, was previously at IBM's definition, which is, let's see if I can get it right here. It's a event-driven computer program with state that runs on a distributed shared ledger that can take custody of assets that are on that ledger.
All right.
That's a very good definition. I think, I think the key part is that the execution of the contracts is being done by a distributed network. And we shouldn't forget about it, because smart contract per se have existed for many, many years in centralized environments. And the key difference is executing the same piece of logic in maybe 5,000 computers at the same time, and that all those computers agree that the result is the same. Because that's what we are doing. We are not trusting a single entity to run our agreements. So
yeah, we're running code on a blockchain, and that has the potential to potentially transfer assets or access to information or other things of value. And that, it isn't something that's been around, that's brand new. It's been talked about since the 90s, right? So Nick Szabo first talked about smart contracts in the mid 90s, and this is kind of the technology that's enabling this more people to explore it and to experiment with it. But I think that raises another interesting question: is what can you do with a smart contract? I mean, what are the types of things that you see use cases for smart contracts?
So beyond the obvious use of contract as kind of a legal definition, or perhaps a digital version of an analog contract, I think one of the other really interesting aspects that we haven't taken a hard look at yet is the machine-to-machine side of transactions. I think smart contracts and blockchains will play a huge role in this. We talk about all the time B2B, B2C, C2C now with consumer-to-consumer lending, but machine-to-machine has a huge possibility to dwarf what we're seeing now, especially as we see IoT devices and things of the like, smart fridges turning on. What is it going to mean when your fridge can transact with Amazon and buy your dish soap or refill your milk or something like that? A lot of this can happen in the background, and there's going to be this whole other economy that we aren't used to having today, I think. We have it to some degree, but not to the level that we could experience it in the future.
Yeah, I think the machine-to-machine space is extremely exciting, because there's a space where the opportunity is completely unaddressed. It's totally blue ocean. There isn't an existing system out there to replace right now, and the traditional system just won't interface with it very well anyways. So we do need to build something from scratch there, and I think it's a very intriguing space to start fleshing out a lot of these ideas. I think the other place where you might see a lot of action is just increasing market transparency in general. Being able to ascertain quickly who owns the underlying for any given asset or financial instrument that's being transacted across an interoperable series of settlement platforms. I think that is another exciting kind of place to go with this technology.
As far as things that are here now, though,
Yeah.
I think it's important to keep in mind that really a multi-sig arrangement is a smart contract. And they work now when we have major corporations that are building these solutions for exchanges to improve their security, to divide control such that there's no single point of failure. That's a terrifically interesting innovation. To an extent, you could have always done this with secret sharing, with ring signatures. But now that the actual asset travels on the cryptographic network that actually enforces the divided control, you have something I think really quite novel, which is something of value to people that is truly not within the power of one person or two people or three people to control. They really do need to agree, assuming, if we can make this assumption, that the private key stays with the individual to whom it was originally intended for. That is remarkable, though, and that presents a lot of confounding questions when it comes to the law. It presents the question of who has custody in that situation, and that's interesting because we've had complicated contractual arrangements for some time in legal history, and we've had to come to grips with standards as to what how those should be interpreted. And we've had standardization of contracts in the UCC and in other places. We're going to now have to figure out how the law looks at these arrangements, which are technical. They are not legal. And how the law then treats individuals who partake in these arrangements. So if I am a BitGo and I have one key of 3, and there's a lot of money or value that's locked in that multi-sig address, what am I? Am I a custodian? Am I a depository institution? It certainly doesn't seem that way. But these are all legal battles that this emergence of a true smart contract that's already doing something, it's doing something maybe less exciting than the Internet of Things, but it's doing something, that it challenges us to rethink our definitions and rethink how we deal with them from a regulatory standpoint.
Well, I think many interesting use cases have been covered. Internet of Things is of course, I mean, delivering the true potential of Internet of Things is one of the things that smart contracts will enable. In my point of view, many of the use cases that are being targeted with smart contracts have a marginal impact on society. So, I mean, if you have a banking system that works, then having a better banking system might help, but it's not key. But if you don't have a banking account at all, like 65% of the population in Latin America, then having a savings account can be a life changer. So if you ask me, smart contracts for the financial inclusion, for pure democracies, are something that will change society as we know it, and are use cases that can be, profit from right now.
Yeah, and multi-sig is one of these early cases, I think, too, because
Absolutely.
you see the emergence of open bazaar, of decentralized markets generally. That's not a big deal for people, maybe not a big deal for people in the US who have access to PayPal, who have access to eBay, who have access to credit cards. But if you're in, I believe, Puerto Rico, PayPal stopped servicing Puerto Rico for a time. I don't know if they're still not servicing them. And there's plenty of places in the world.
That happened in Argentina with the developers of Google, for example.
Right.
So.
And in these places, if you have an item that you want to sell because it's surplus to you, it's extra capital, it's underutilized resources, that's a huge drag on the economy if you can't make that transaction in a trusted way. And the way that the smart contract in this case established trust is somewhat mundane in a conversation of smart contracts in 2016 because it's just a multi-sig transaction, but that's magnificent, that we could have a regularized way of guaranteeing that I see where the money's flowing, I know my counterparty when they've put the cash up, basically, and I know I can pick a moderator.
Yeah, I mean, in one way to think about a smart contract, just to analogize it to the web, if Bitcoin is, some people analogize it to the email of the blockchain ecosystem, smart contracts enable more advanced applications to emerge, right? There's this concept of a dApp, which is either one or more smart contracts that can be bundled together and can build a higher version application. And one of the other areas that we didn't touch upon is just organizations, right? So one of the other applications for smart contracts is that you can bundle them together and actually begin to model out digital organizations. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about those.
It's interesting because when you're talking about multi-sig, I think of treasury controls in a typical organization,
right.
and how it maps so closely. The difference is that you've automated that trust point, and because you've automated it, you're now you're able to scale this and democratize the access to things like treasury controls for more and more people, which then allows you to build out different types of organizations because so much of that infrastructure that you would typically have to build, hire for, spend a lot of money on, it can be automated now.
Right.
And so it's a scale thing. Right now we're seeing a lot of stuff that exists already for people who have a lot more wealth moving down the tail. And that's frankly the most exciting aspect of all of this.
To some extent, Ronald Coase is on point here. So Coase's theory of the firm was that markets have transaction costs. And so, we could have an office and I could go run down to the corner shop and buy a pencil whenever I need one, or the office could have a storeroom and they centrally buy pencils and provision them for the employees. Obviously, if transaction costs are high, I need to make change, I need to find a vendor, all of these things, then we need a firm, we need a socialized island within a market economy to provide those goods for me. Smart contracts, by lowering the transaction costs of a market economy, potentially open the door for much more market-type interactions, wherein I would contract unilaterally with many individuals rather than participate within a firm. And maybe it's not even the cold capitalistic kind of contracting. Maybe, and this is a big fuzzy kind of concept, maybe there's something more in there, maybe there's voting rights or something else, such that we could have basically a market firm, a firm that exists with a market inside of it, if you will. Or the firm becomes the market as a whole.
And if we spend some time on the transparency piece, it's not just the transaction costs you're reducing, but the information costs in markets
Right.
as well. So it's just another way to gain more efficiency in markets to enable you to do more and more things.
Right, and maybe we'll see digital organizations that are potentially larger because the transaction costs are lowered, so it's easier to administer these organizations. And if transaction costs are lower, then smaller groups of people can band together. And if you can tie voting and other advanced logic to that type of organization, you could begin to do some interesting things. So let's say you wanted to develop smart contracts. I mean, what's your options? What would you do? What platform would you use?
So
I got to ask the hard questions.
Yeah,
right?
I'll go ahead and jump in here and speak on Ethereum's behalf. I think Ethereum's offering a really interesting value proposition, and that is to make blockchains as easy as web development. I had spent some time working with Bitcoin and the other Satoshi clones, and it's not trivial to kind of build more advanced applications on top. Some possibilities about multi-sig are there, but the scripting language for Bitcoin was limited for an intentional purpose, and that's fine. I think there is the case to be made that a Turing complete or a more advanced scripting language will help us push the bounds of this whole industry out to the more common developer. So rather than having to be a senior developer and also have a cryptographer with you to understand what's going on, all you need now is you may be a junior web developer, they know a little bit of JavaScript, and then you can start building contracts on top of that. For me, that's the real value proposition. I am not the greatest developer in the world. I want to build a platform that's easy for my dumb self to build. So that's kind of what we're trying to build with Ethereum, and I think that's where the real power is.
Well, I would say with Rootstock you have the same, but with the Bitcoin security on the back. But again, it's not that. For me, it's not a competition. I think what we are doing is we are building a full new ecosystem, like we were building back in the web. And what you need is standards. So what we have to make sure as platform builders, like Ethereum or Rootstock, is to make sure that developers, and I agree on that point, find a common language, find a common infrastructure, so they can port their solutions to wherever they see fit according to their risk appetite and their needs. So I think it's interesting that more solutions and more smart contracting options with different systemic risk are appearing. Because if we had only one platform with one set of systemic risk, then the whole system would be as fragile as that option. And we definitely have totally different systemic risk than Ethereum does. And that's an important thing. So we are assisting to the creation of a full new ecosystem that is trying to disrupt markets or economies that have maybe 300 years. So it's interesting to keep in mind that our end goal should be to provide solutions, easy tools for those out there trying to build, competitive solutions on the financial markets or in the construction of the future of democracy.
Yeah, and we should also be cognizant that blockchains aren't really the only application of these technologies. I think that smart contracts make the most sense on blockchain for a lot of reasons I won't go into right now. But the work that other organizations are doing, IPFS has got a lot of interest as a storage component. We've talked about smart contracts as a processing component. You can also have a communication component. I think that as we start to build up these pieces as Lego blocks, we will transcend the idea of initially smart contracts once we've figured out exactly what that is, and kind of transition kind of what Aaron was mentioning, like the DAO, the distributed autonomous organization. And even if it's not autonomous, the fact that it can live completely online and do a lot of the stuff that we do in the real world, but cheaper and faster and better, I think there's a lot of savings and efficiency to be had there.
Right. I think the biggest threat, whatever platform works, the answer is whatever platform works for you, right, and meet your needs. That's the answer. I think the biggest risk is that we move too fast on standards, and we don't allow the market to kind of emerge and allow people to experiment freely, even at the very base layers here, right? We need lots of ideas and lots of blockchains out there, lots of competition, and then let standards kind of emerge naturally from the market, and then we'll describe those standards at a later date. I think that's the appropriate way to do this, but prematurely standardizing some of these elements, I think, is a big risk to the ecosystem and having a vibrant ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think certain services also need to arise, like, for example, oracleization of information. It's something that it will be key, and it's not that easy for everybody to set up their own oracling system. And you know, when you think about solutions, the real world solutions cannot live only on information within the blockchain. They need to go and gather information from outside the blockchain. So I think also it's not only about platforms, but also about services that need to emerge for this smart contracting market to really thrive and become what we expect it to be.
Yeah, and maybe just so everybody's on the same page, so an oracle would be an outside data source that you would feed into a smart contract, right? Yes. So let's say you had a financial smart contract, you needed to check an interest rate or the price of a stock, that could get fed into the smart contract, and the smart contract could execute some logic and take actions or distribute assets based on that.
Yes.
Since we're on terminology, I always like to just try and build categories here, and this might be helpful to the audience. So in my mind, if a smart contract is event-driven, what are the events? You've got oracles, which you just described, which attempt to create the flesh node is a terrible phrase, but you know, the interface between the cyber and the real, you know. That's one, and it's sci-fi. It is. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know exactly how they're going to work and how they're going to work reliably. Maybe it'll be branded. Maybe, you know, NASDAQ will provide an oracle, and the fidelity of it will simply be their brand, you know, or something like that. Or maybe it'll be some other more exotic relationship. More simple than oracles would, of course, just be individual control. So people can take actions when there is an asset or a piece of data that is being manipulated by multiple people. So that's the multisig. That's people. Right. Time seems to be available if there's a blockchain for time stamping, so you can say X number of moments beyond this, however we measure a moment, whether it's a new block confirmation or what. That seems to be the full set. Am I wrong? I'd be interested in if anyone else has other ideas as to what are the inputs to these things? What triggers them?
I guess you could only maybe add like an artificial intelligent agent.
Artificial
that would probably be the last one, but that's, I think, way off in the future. But talking about the future, before we turn over to questions, so where do you see this going, you know, the next 5 years? You know, what are we going to see in terms of smart contract development, in terms of distributed or decentralized applications that are going to emerge?
I think that the next few years are going to be building out the core services and layers, you know, the basic Lego bricks. We need to decide what sizes, what shapes, what colors that suit the majority of use cases and make it easy for developers. And I think in the 3, 4, 5 year time frame, we'll probably start to see some more advanced concepts of these DAOs, and might represent more of the back office functions that we understand today. The systems we have in place now are actually relatively quite simple that represent smart contracts and DAOs. There's a lot of work to do, and part of the problem, you know, we have a risk of moving too fast, but there's definitely a difficulty in reaching the right kinds of developers to work on both the protocol and also come to agreement on the types of services that we need smart contracts to support in the long run.
Yeah, I would hope that we'll be meeting each other from both ends. So you'll have people experimenting, hopefully like really wild experiments too. Like the wilder the better, because we want like lots of diversity in the ecosystem at the protocol level and maybe up the stack even a little bit. And at the same time have people who have actual market needs start developing things that feed back towards these protocols where they actually look to some of these, whether it's a private blockchain or, permissioned blockchain, or it changes every day, or shared ledger, right? Shared ledger now. DLT. Whether it's one of those or whether it's on a public blockchain or some hybrid of the two, maybe we'll start seeing actual use cases being developed out in the market and new markets opening up where people start working back to these because they realize that these solutions are giving them a better option than what exists today, right? And I think that's going to drive, hopefully, forward a lot of these projects. So experiment with wild ideas, and then hopefully the market will come and meet some of them.
But that point of experimentation and diversity is a double-edged sword, too. I always look at these from a regulatory perspective. So on the one hand, you have this great opportunity where when it comes to online interactions that are contractual or quasi-contractual, it's a desert right now. You are given a certain number of opportunities as a consumer for digital services, a few different companies, and you cannot suggest different privacy policy terms to any of those companies. It's not it's not a situation where two minds are meeting. It's a situation where one company has an army of lawyers drafting a multi-page document. You click through and you don't pay attention. With the proliferation of tools that can actually bind people to, say, have their data, their personal data, manipulated in certain ways or not manipulated in certain ways, that anyone in theory could write a new way of manipulating your data, and you could then assent to it, the consumer is given potentially much more choice as the emergence of these potentially distributed systems for doing different things, whether it's personal data management or whether it's online markets or whether it's Uber that's going to be disaggregated. Any of these things hopefully will have more choice in the contracting. However, with the proliferation of choice will be a rampant proliferation of contracts that don't do what they say they do. And this will raise the question of, did the user interface that the customer or the business was presented with honestly reflect the underlying contract logic? Is that easy to audit? Is it easier in the smart contracting world because we at least know that these things are code and we can have some people who will read the code and understand it? Does the consensus mechanism matter? If it is a permissioned or private consensus mechanism, would we then still be able to audit the code or trust that it is going to run as the code says it's going to run, or will there be an interruption in the consensus mechanism? So you've got possible real consumer benefits in a proliferation and a diversity of new opportunities for binding oneself digitally to some operation. But you've got this proliferation of potential landmines too, I think. And I don't know what the regulatory structure to rein in a menagerie of smart contracts would look like.
Well, I think it's proportional regulation. I think that's the answer, right? As long as these things are very, very small scale, then, as a consumer, be warned, right? Like, if you enter into some of these agreements in the early days, you're going to be subject to more risk. As these things grow, as the ecosystem grows, as certain winners emerge, then I think it's time to have a different conversation about what proportional regulation means for those different services. But yeah. I agree, there's a lot of landmines. There are a lot more coming. Okay. So it's a good day to be a lawyer.
If you're learning code, too.
Yeah. And if you're a lawyer of the codes, it's a great day.
Yeah, it's always a good day to be a lawyer.
We've been around for a while.
My father is one, so I know it from close. But I would say I have a strange fixation on financial inclusion. So from my perspective, it's like what I would see is that the tools required for that inclusion to happen will be built. And for that you need stable assets or representations of fiat currencies to happen. You need those assets to be back without the requirement of a third party that ensures the value. So you will have smart contracts creating those assets and backing the assets with Bitcoin or Ether or whatever digital asset you choose to. For that you will need oracles that will provide information. And one key element I think will be a game changer for the smart contracting will be the zero knowledge proof solutions that will enable private information to be saved and executed on a public blockchain. So with those elements in place, we will see the full realization of what we envisioned for Bitcoin back in the days and for smart contracting today.
It's interesting. The privacy element is really key because none of this really starts to work until we can actually solve for this privacy issue.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting when you hear SMART. There's this great Evgeny Morozov quote, right? It says, when you hear SMART, it's an acronym for surveillance marketed as revolutionary tech. So we need to fix the privacy problem before this thing really happens.
It's the same issues that are inherent with Bitcoin, right? It's traceable. It's not anonymous. It's pseudonymous, right? Yeah. And if you're putting contracts or contractual arrangements on a public blockchain, and you're sensitive about that, then you're going to run into some issues.
And there is a cultural aspect to it, because it's not only that the technology has to evolve, but also, people has to realize the value of privacy. Yeah. Because for many years we didn't even have the discussion about it. It's not. So it's the difference between privacy and secrecy and all these things that with the transparency that open blockchains bring, or open ledgers bring, that also bring a discussion to the society about what privacy is, if it's required or not, and what it means for us in day-to-day situations.
Yeah. I'll just throw in, just because we didn't touch on it, but I do think it's important too. I'm also excited about just watching and seeing if the microtransaction-based economies will emerge, right? So when you have a digital currency that can be broken down to a fraction of a penny, you tie that with low-cost smart contracts, you can really begin to monetize the web, because frankly, most things online are just worth less than a penny, and we're just not accurately capturing that. You know, think of Spotify, which denominates its streams in a fraction of a penny to begin with today. But I think we should just turn it over. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If you do, I see a question over there.
One of the things that I see the problem with smart contracts is how do you incorporate externalities within that contract? For example, I have a contract with person A on performance, and there may be a force majeure event. How does that get picked up?
I mean,
Can I take that one?
oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to think about that is a smart contract does not need to be a full legal contract.
Yep.
There's certain aspects of a contract that you can reduce down into code. There's other aspects of a contract, like a force majeure, reps and warranties, that you will not. So you have to view these as blended agreements, right? So you're going to incorporate code by reference for the lawyers in the room into the agreement. It doesn't change like the need to have a meeting of the minds. You need to have a meeting of the minds. People need to come to an agreement. It's just a way you reduce it down. And it's leveraging the advantage and precision of code along with the potential need to have the self-executing nature of it, which means that you could potentially immediately bind people together if you so want to do that.
But you can have oracles that provide information from the externalities. That's why I was saying that oracling is key for these to become a reality.
I think in realms of higher uncertainty too, if it's a commercial contract with a lot of value, I would never enter into anything that didn't have a human element at some level of it. So we could have a contract that generally self-executes based on an oracle, but there is some time limit before it executes, and within that time limit, or at some point, there can be some sort of arbitrator invoked and brought in to bring the human element. This is actually not an entirely novel problem either. There's this mythical creature in that you learn about in law school called the perfectly contingent contract. And even if you're writing in English and not in C++ or not in whatever, you're never going to take into account everything. And so it's the self-executory aspect of the smart contract that maybe makes this seem different. It's like, well, if it goes and it's irreversible in some way, what will we do then? But that just means we're going to need systems of arbitration built into these things, which may be an additional level.
Well, you could challenge it after the fact, right? So to the extent the parties know each other. Yeah.
Speaking of oracles, and for the subject that you just brought up, could you make the lawyers as like an oracle network?
You could.
And then kill all the lawyers. Yeah.
Well, let's not go there. Yeah.
For the auditing process.
No, but yeah, I mean, I think there's the notion that you could have decentralized arbitration, right? So why can't the internet decide certain disputes or have lawyers band together and do that?
So for everybody who missed out on mining Bitcoin, oracles are the new miners, right? Like Oracle is the new mining. That is actually going to be one of the easiest to attain like value add services in this whole ecosystem, is to provide a trusted oracle, to provide SLAs around it, and to ensure the data integrity that's fed into these contracts.
And
that's a huge business opportunity.
OpenBazaar, right,
Yeah.
which is relying on some sort of a smart contract. That's one of the ways that they're hoping to monetize their business.
Yes, and also I think a key emergent from these new platforms we are building is reputation. I mean, we have been assisting to the creation of different reputation systems, and if you go to eBay, what it is not a marketplace, it's a reputation system. Right. I mean, the marketplace is a tool, but the reputation is the key. And I think if you want to think on a global scale ecosystem, then reputation will be the identity of the future. So who you are and how you behave through the life of, through your internet life, will be who you are, and will be that reputation will enable you to work with third parties, or have maybe an oracle that is a third party that has enough reputation to vouch for a certain situation. So that's another key element that we will see appear in the next years, reputation systems.
Oh, I see a question there.
We started out this session on smart contracts by saying that they're not smart and they're not contracts. But I'm interested in the intersection between the law and smart contracts. Some people say that the one of the obstacles to their adoption is the legal recognition of a smart contract, but it seems like in so many scenarios they can be little more than software that automates a function in accordance with a legal agreement that might be made offline. So, sorry for the long preamble. The question is, to what degree does legal recognition of smart contracts, is that required for the broader adoption of this technology?
If you're looking at it as these are programmable transactions that replace contracts, so if you have smarter transactions, you need fewer contracts in commerce generally, then the answer is no. Because you don't need legal recognition to not do something that's legal, and you don't have recourse to the courts, and you're not trying to seek that in the future. So that's fine. To the extent you want all of those things, then you need a separate paper contract, and you can automate some parts of the performance of that contract as you see fit, and then that can be baked in as Aaron, you can reference it in the contract or otherwise bake in a framework, whether it's network rules at the blockchain level or at different levels.
And to see how this might potentially shuffle out, we can look at the process right now as a company like BitGo, to go back to the multi-sig, very simple smart contracting example, is trying to fit into a money transmission regime at the state level, where custodians traditionally need to be licensed, where people who write software traditionally weren't even anywhere near those regulators, and they are somewhere in between by virtue of the fact that there is this protocol that's controlling an asset according to certain rules, and they are functionaries of some sort, have one key out of 3. This works for sidechains and federated pegs too, have 8 keys out of 15. Diego and I have been talking about Rootstock a little bit lately. What does the law see those things? That is a problem. Because if we get that wrong, we could unwittingly apply the aggressive prudential regulation, which we perhaps need for true custodians, apply that onto people who are not presenting risks to their counterparties or to their customers, and stifle that innovation without any concomitant regulatory benefit, without any achievement of consumer protection, because there wasn't need for it because it was baked in. And this is very difficult because it's hard enough to explain Bitcoin to people who have very important jobs that don't deal with technology, that deal with regulatory structures or deal with other things. And then to, on top of that, explain a smart contract, as we've all, and myself included, struggled with it here, to that person. This is a battle, and it will need to be fought.
And it's the need for that proportional regulation. It's really, really critical. We're at this point in time where we have the potential, right? This point in time where there's this huge amount of innovation that's happening that could lead to creative destruction of the very types of industries that tax the poor for being poor. Like, we have this huge opportunity to democratize all of these financial tools that a lot of us take for granted, but it will only get there if we have a regulatory framework that is proportional to the actual need for society and to achieve its policy goals. And we have to, that I completely agree with what you said, Peter, just to highlight it.
And to democratize the web. But I mean, fortunately in the US, we also have very light rules for forming a binding contract. So the fact that you're manifesting that in software as opposed to written language should generally not be a problem. It's really more of a pragmatic issue of if something goes wrong and you want to walk into court, you probably want to have a written agreement in place. I think we have time for one more question. I think I see one all the way in the back over there. Yeah.
If you write a smart contract to do something that's explicitly forbidden by the law, have you committed a crime, or would you potentially be protected by freedom of speech or freedom of expression constitutional hearing?
Peter and I literally
were
were just
planning
talking
this
about
panel,
this.
got into a nice little
Thank you
fight
for
about
planting
this.
that question. You want to go for it?
I mean, that is a fantastically interesting, nerdy legal proposition that we're going to see, and I'm going to be salivating through the whole process, because what we've seen recently with the Apple iPhone San Bernardino hullabaloo, if we'll call it that, is exactly what will unfold again. So ultimately, smart contracts are speech in some way, not necessarily executing them,
right?
But the code itself, the source code, is speech. Is it protected speech under the First Amendment? If it looks like Bernstein v. DOJ, which was a case about encryption reference documents that were technically prohibited to be sent around because of export control laws, because they were considered dangerous weapons that we don't want to get in the hands of our competitors. That case, the Bernstein case, decided that those encryption standards were free speech, could not be restricted. Their publication and distribution could not be restricted because of export control rules. The smart contract is similar, but a smart contract also provides someone the means of doing a lot of things, of moving value, of having an exchange with another person, an exchange that might be prohibited under laws of various jurisdictions, whether it's gambling, whether it's drugs, whether it's all these things.
Yeah.
So would you be liable simply for speaking in this country where we generally say that prior restraints on speech are generally a no-go unless there's a really compelling government interest? That fight will happen, and the question, there's no precedent here yet. There's a lot of cases that are indicative, but this one will end up at the Supreme Court.
Well, even though we have, the right to free speech, it's still not legal to yell fire in a crowded room.
Exactly.
Right? So I think maybe, we will definitely see some cases about this.
Obscene contracts. I know them when I see them. You know.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a really interesting time. But certainly at the end of the day, I think it's true currently that a human somewhere has to push a button that makes a bunch of dominoes fall that causes a smart contract to execute. And I think that that's where it's going to come down to. If somebody does something bad, the authorities are going to want to know which humans push which buttons to make the computer do that thing.
Right. But traditionally, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they were all using a central service.
Yep.
And they would target the central service to have effective regulation.
Yep.
If it's an ecosystem, a menagerie of smart contracts, it's going to be more like the whack-a-mole problem we saw with file sharing and torrents.
Intermediaries are thinning out, right? So you're going to have to go to your endpoints. But I think we're out of time. I wanted to thank the panel. Thank you for your time. Thank you, guys.